Okay, so ready to get a little bit creepy?
Always.
Today we're diving into online privacy. Specifically, we're looking at this article, Online Privacy, a Real Threat or Paranoid Illusion. It's like, are those targeted ads we see all the time just a coincidence? Or is there something bigger going on? Like, are we really trading our privacy for convenience?
Right.
It's a big question in our digital age.
Yeah, and you know what I thought was really interesting about this article is that it doesn't just jump into all the facts and figures. It actually starts by talking about that feeling of being watched, which I think a lot of people can relate to. It kind of makes you wonder, is that just a gut feeling? Or is it actually happening?
Right. It's like when you're talking about something with a friend.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you start seeing ads for it everywhere. Makes you wonder who's listening.
Yeah.
So I think one of the first things we have to unpack is this whole data as the new oil concept. This article claims that companies like Google and Amazon are collecting something like 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day. Is that even a real number?
Oh, it is. And it's a mind-boggling amount of data. But the real question is, what are they actually doing with all that data? And it's used in all sorts of ways. But one of the most obvious examples is targeted advertising. Like, imagine you're talking to a friend about, I don't know, maybe joining a gym. And then suddenly your social media feeds are flooded with ads for running shoes, workout gear, you name it. That's no coincidence. That's data collection and targeted advertising at work.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely experienced that. But I've always wondered, how do they even get all this information on us in the first place? Are they listening to our conversations? Is that even possible?
Not necessarily listening, but they are tracking us. Yeah, it's like we're leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs every time we go online. And websites use all sorts of tools to collect this data, one of the most common being cookies. Those little pieces of code that remember your preferences and browsing habits on websites. Some cookies are actually pretty helpful, like remembering what's in your shopping cart. Remembering your login details. But others can be used to track you across different websites, building up this detailed profile of your online activity. What you click on, what you buy, even how long you spend on a certain page.
So cookies are like little spies following us around the internet.
Kind of, yeah.
But this article also mentioned something called fingerprinting. And that sounds a bit more sinister. What exactly is that all about?
Well, fingerprinting is a way for companies to track you even when you try to block or clear cookies. They essentially use unique characteristics of your device to identify you. Things like your screen resolution, your operating system, even the fonts you have installed can be used to create a unique digital fingerprint that's almost impossible to erase.
Wow. It's like they can identify you by your digital walk or something.
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of impressive and kind of creepy at the same time.
It is a little creepy. But, it's not just websites that we have to worry about. What about all those apps that we use on our phones? The source claims that 60% of free apps share data with third parties.
Yeah, and those apps, whether it's games or those little utility apps, can be incredibly data hungry. They can collect information about your location, your contacts, your browsing history, even your spending habits. It's kind of like having a tiny microphone and camera in your pocket, constantly recording what you're doing and who you're talking to.
Okay, I'm starting to feel a little paranoid now. But, the source also brings up government surveillance, and I'm wondering, isn't that taking things a little too far?
Well, it's definitely a complex issue, but the Snowden revelations really showed us that even seemingly private activities like our emails, our web searches, can be swept up in mass surveillance programs. It really blurred the lines between national security and personal privacy, and it raises the question of how much access is too much.
So this isn't just about annoying ads anymore, right? It's about who has access to our information and how they're actually using it. The source claims that this isn't about having something to hide, it's about control over our own data. But I'm curious, what does that really mean for us? What were the actual consequences of this loss of control?
Well, think about it this way. Algorithms are increasingly used to make decisions that affect our lives, whether it's what we see online, what job offers we get, or even our chances of getting a loan. And these algorithms, they're lines of code, but they can subtly influence our decisions, reinforce our biases, and even impact our mental health.
Okay, so you're saying that these algorithms can actually shape how we think and feel.
In a way, yes. Think about it. If you're constantly being shown content that confirms your existing beliefs, it can create these echo chambers where you're less likely to be exposed to different perspectives. And that can have, a real impact on the way you see the world. And, We can't forget about things like the 2016 elections and the Cambridge Analytica scandal. That was a real wake-up call for a lot of people. Personal data was harvested from millions of Facebook users without their consent, and it was used to target them with highly personalized political ads.
Yeah, and that really highlighted the dark side of data collection, right? And the potential for manipulation on a massive scale.
Absolutely.
And then there's this whole issue of data permanence. Once our data is out there, it's practically impossible to erase. It's like a digital tattoo that follows us wherever we go online.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where data brokers come into the picture.
Data brokers?
Yeah.
Who are these guys?
Yeah.
I feel like I've never even heard of them before.
They're kind of like the middlemen of the data world. Okay. Companies that you've probably never heard of, like Axiom, Experian, they gather thousands of data points on individuals, everything from your online purchases to your medical history, and they sell this information to the highest bidder.
Hold on. They're selling our personal information to anyone who wants it. That's kind of terrifying.
It is a bit unsettling. I mean, think about it. Anyone who wants to know more about you, employers, marketers, insurers, even law enforcement agencies, they can all buy this information from data brokers. And it can be used to make decisions about your job prospects, your insurance premiums, your eligibility for a loan. The possibilities are kind of endless and a little scary.
This isn't some abstract threat anymore. We're talking about real-world consequences here. But before we go any further, I think we need to talk about consent. This whole idea of consent. The article argues that we're not really making informed choices about our data. We're just claiming, I agree, without even knowing what we're agreeing to.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point. We're constantly being bombarded with privacy policies. Those things that are so long and complicated that nobody actually reads them?
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that.
I think we all are. But even if you did try to read them, I'm not sure you'd actually understand all the implications. The language is often very vague, and it's designed to protect the companies, not the users.
So it's like we're unknowingly giving away our data without even realizing it. And then there's this whole personalization thing. On the surface, it seems helpful. Getting recommendations that are tailored to your interests. But the source suggests there's a dark side to this as well.
Yeah, personalization can be great in some ways, but it can also lead to filter bubbles and echo chambers, where we're only exposed to information that confirms our existing beliefs. And that can lead to increased polarization and make it harder to have productive conversations with people who have different viewpoints.
And I've noticed that platforms like Facebook and TikTok, they're really good at using our data to create these addictive feedback loops, right? They're designed to keep us scrolling and liking and sharing, even if it's not always in our best interest.
It's like we're trading our attention and data for fleeting moments of entertainment. And that can be a problem.
Yeah, it definitely can. So it seems like we're caught in this paradox. We love the convenience and the connection that technology gives us, but we're also becoming increasingly aware of the costs to our privacy, to our autonomy. But is there any way to break free from this cycle? Or are we just, doomed to accept this as the price of living in a digital world?
Well, the article does offer some hope. It suggests that we're not entirely powerless in this fight for privacy. There are actually a lot of steps we can take to protect ourselves and reclaim some control over our data. But I think we'll save those solutions for the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, good. Because right now I'm feeling like I need to go off the grid and live in a cabin in the woods. I'm not sure I could survive without my smartphone.
I get it. It can be overwhelming. But before you ditch your phone and head for the hills, I think we should explore some practical strategies for navigating this digital landscape without having to give up your privacy entirely. There are options.
Okay. I like the sound of that. Okay, so we've talked about the downsides of all this, the tracking, the data collection, even the potential for manipulation. But before we all, swear off technology forever, I think we need to talk solutions. I mean, the article does suggest that there are things we can do to protect our privacy. So where do we even begin? What can we actually do?
Well, the good news is you don't have to become some kind of tech genius or disappear off the grid completely to have more control over your data. There are actually some pretty simple things that anyone can do. For starters, the article recommends using privacy-focused technology. So things like encrypted messaging apps, secure browsers, and virtual private networks.
VPNs. I've heard of those. But I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure how they work. Like, you think you're safe on public Wi-Fi because you have a password, but is that enough? Can you explain how a VPN actually boosts security?
Sure. So think of a VPN like a secret tunnel for your internet traffic. It encrypts your data, so it's basically unreadable to anyone who might be trying to snoop on you. So even if you're on public Wi-Fi where hackers could potentially be lurking, your online activity stays hidden.
Okay, so it's like a digital invisibility cloak.
Pretty much, yeah.
I like that.
Oh,
Okay, and what about those messaging apps and browsers that you mentioned? Are they that much different from what I'm using now?
Yeah, I mean, they're designed with privacy in mind. So, for example, let's talk about Signal. It uses something called end-to-end encryption, which means that only you and the person you're messaging can actually read your conversations. Not even Signal themselves can access the content of your messages.
Wow, that's some serious privacy.
Yeah, and then there's Tor.
Tor.
You've probably heard of it. It's often used by, journalists and activists in countries with strict censorship.
Right.
And that's because Tor is all about anonymity. It bounces your internet traffic through a network of relays, making it extremely difficult to trace your online activity back to you. So it's like you're taking this winding route through a maze to lose anyone who might be following you.
That sounds pretty high tech, though. I mean, is there anything simpler, anything that, the average person can do to protect their privacy without having to become like a cybersecurity expert?
Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of little changes you can make to your everyday habits that can make a big difference. Things like regularly clearing your cookies, reviewing the permissions that you've given to the apps on your phone, and just being a little bit more mindful about the information you share online. Those are all good places to start.
Okay, those are definitely things that I can do. But what about the companies themselves? I mean, aren't there any laws in place to protect our data?
Yeah, there are some regulations that are starting to emerge, like the GDPR in Europe.
The GDPR?
It stands for the General Data Protection Regulation. And then in the U.S., we have the CCPA.
CCPA.
The California Consumer Privacy Act. And these laws they're definitely a step in the right direction. They give individuals more control over their data, and they require companies to be more transparent about how they collect and use information. So that's good, right?
That's good, but the article also seems, I don't know, a little skeptical about how effective these regulations actually are.
Yeah, I mean, enforcement can be challenging. And with technology evolving so rapidly, laws often lag behind. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game.
Right. So I guess we can use privacy-focused tools, we can change our digital habits, and hope that regulations eventually catch up with the Wild West of the digital world.
Yeah.
But is that enough? I mean, the article really leaves us with this big question. Are we building a future where privacy and progress are simply incompatible?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Have we become so reliant on technology that we're willing to just give up our privacy in exchange for convenience? The article paints a picture of a future that's pretty dystopian, where privacy is a luxury that only the wealthy can afford, and where constant surveillance is just the norm. It's a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah, that's a little scary. But it also feels a little inevitable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like the more connected we become, the harder it is to maintain any sense of privacy.
It's a valid concern, for sure, but I don't think it's inevitable. I think the choices we make today, both individually and collectively, are going to determine what that future looks like. And I think we all need to be asking ourselves, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to give up in exchange for convenience? And what are the long-term consequences of living in a world without privacy?
So it's not just about, using a VPN or being careful about what we post online. It's about having a much bigger conversation about the kind of digital society we want to create and the values that we want to prioritize.
Absolutely. Online privacy isn't just some tech issue. It's a human rights issue. It's about our fundamental freedoms, the right to think freely, to express ourselves without fear, to connect with others without constantly being monitored. It's about our basic humanity.
And the article really emphasizes that this is a fight that starts with each of us. It's our responsibility to be informed, to take action, to demand better from the companies and institutions that hold our data.
Yeah, it's about reclaiming our digital agency. We're not powerless in this.
Okay, I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic now. Maybe we can create a digital world where privacy and progress can actually coexist.
Yeah.
But I do think we've only scratched the surface here. What about these data brokers that we talked about earlier? They still seem like a big piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, they're a key part of the problem. And they often operate in the shadows, collecting and selling our information without our knowledge or consent. And I think we need to understand how they work and what we can do to mitigate the risks they pose.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we need to shine a light on these data brokers, see what they're really up to.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about those data brokers. I mean, They sound like something out of a spy novel, right? Collecting all this information, building these secret dossiers on people.
It's true. They're not exactly companies you hear about every day, but I mean, companies like Axiom, Experian, they probably know more about you than you realize. In fact, the source mentions that a single data broker can have like 5,000 data points on a single person. That's a pretty detailed picture of your life, right?
5,000 data points. But what kind of information are we even talking about here? Is it just basic stuff like my age, my address, or is it more invasive than that?
Oh, it goes way beyond the basics. We're talking about your online purchases, your browsing history, your social media activity, even loyalty programs, rewards cards, all that stuff. They're collecting it all and using it to create this digital mosaic of your habits, your preferences, even your beliefs. It's pretty amazing and a little bit scary too.
So they're basically building this shadow profile of who we are online. But who are they selling this information to? And what are they using it for?
Well, it could be anyone, really. Marketers trying to target you with ads, employers screening job candidates, insurance companies setting premiums, even law enforcement agencies can use this information.
Hold on, law enforcement. I mean, that seems like a slippery slope. Isn't there a risk that this information could be used to unfairly target certain people?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine being denied a job or a loan based on data that you never even consented to share. Or even worse, being investigated for a crime based on inaccurate or, incomplete information that was collected by these data brokers. It raises some serious concerns about due process and the potential for abuse.
So these data brokers are profiting off our personal information without our knowledge or consent. And there are some potentially serious consequences. It all feels very Big Brother-ish, to be honest, but is there anything we could do about it? I mean, can we actually stop them?
Honestly, it's not easy. Data brokers operate in this kind of legal gray area, and regulations are having a tough time keeping up with their practices. Laws like GDPR and CCPA are helpful, but they have limitations, and enforcing them can be really challenging.
So what can we do? Are we just at the mercy of these data brokers?
Not completely. I mean, we can definitely take steps to minimize our digital footprint, using privacy-focused browsers, VPNs, being careful about what we share online, opting out of data collection whenever possible. But it's a constant battle, and it requires being, pretty vigilant.
It's a lot to think about, but I guess at least now we're aware of the problem, right? Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly. The more we understand about how these data brokers operate, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves. And, by shining a light on their practices, we can push for stronger regulations and greater transparency in this whole data marketplace.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into online privacy. We talked about how companies and governments collect and use our data. We talked about the consequences of this data collection and the steps we can take to protect our privacy. It's a complicated issue with, no easy answers. But the article ends on this hopeful note, reminding us that we're not powerless. We can fight for our right to privacy, both individually and collectively.
Absolutely. It's a fight worth having. Because at the end of the day, online privacy, it's not just about protecting our data. It's about protecting our freedom, our autonomy, our right to kind of determine our own narratives in this digital world.
Well said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into online privacy. We explored some of the darker sides of the digital world, but hopefully, you're leaving with a sense of empowerment.
Yeah.
Because the choices we make, the tools we use, the information we share, the companies we support, it all matters. Don't forget, your privacy matters.
It really does. And it's worth fighting for.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay private.